I came home from a 3-day work trip, rolled my suitcase up my own driveway, and found my nursery room stripped bare. A shiny new lock already fitted to the door, while my husband's younger brother's things spilled across my backyard like it was already his. My in-laws sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee I paid for, acting like nothing in the world had moved. That room was supposed to be my son's, and my husband, I would later learn, had known about all of it before I ever unpacked. I rolled my suitcase up my own driveway at 30 weeks pregnant, and the nursery window was dark. The sage green curtains I had hung in April were gone, not drawn, not closed, gone. And parked in my spot, right where my sedan was supposed to go, sat a black pickup truck I recognized but had no reason to expect. My name is Darcy Ellsworth. I am 31 years old, a certified registered nurse anesthetist, and I had just driven 4 hours home from a 3-day assignment in Rochester, Minnesota, with swollen ankles and a baby boy sitting on my bladder. The house I was walking toward, a 3-bedroom in Ankeny, Iowa, was mine. My name on the deed, my signature on the mortgage, my money, every payment for 2 years before I married anyone. I dragged my suitcase past Rhett's truck and fished my keys out of my coat pocket, and the feeling in my stomach was already ahead of my brain. The porch light was on. The front door was unlocked. The hallway smelled like coffee I had not made, brewed in a percolator I did not own. I left my suitcase by the stairs and climbed. The nursery door had a lock on it, a brass deadbolt, brand new, screwed into the frame at eye level. That door had not had a lock on Friday when I left. On the floor outside it, stacked against the wall like evidence at a crime scene, sat the disassembled rails of my son's crib, 3 boxes of diapers I had bought on sale in September, and a bag of baby blankets folded in handwriting that was not mine. Someone had labeled them. Someone had handled my son's things with hands that had no permission to touch them and written my name on the box like a forwarding address. Let me be clear about something. I was 30 weeks pregnant, standing in my own hallway, looking at a deadbolt on a room I had painted sage green with my own hands, and my brother-in-law was on the other side of it. I knocked. The door opened, and Rhett Ellsworth stood there, shirtless, 27 years old, Garrett's younger brother, a former auto detailer between jobs for the 3rd time in 2 years. Behind him, where the crib was supposed to be, I saw a weight bench, 2 duffel bags, and a flat-screen television tuned to a football game I could hear through the wall from the hallway. He looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who showed up on the wrong day. "Oh, hey, you're back early," he said. "I figured you wouldn't mind. You're barely here anyway." "Where is my son's crib?" I said. "Basement, relax." He leaned against the doorframe. "It's not like he's here yet." I went downstairs because I thought I would find allies. I found Lorraine and Noel. Lorraine Ellsworth, 61, my mother-in-law, a retired school cafeteria supervisor who could organize 400 lunches without raising her voice, sat at my kitchen table with a coffee mug she had brought from her own cabinet in Ames. She looked at me, and her eyes flicked to the ceiling and back before she spoke. That flick told me everything. She knew. She had known before I walked in. "He's going to be an uncle, Darcy," Lorraine said. "Family needs room to grow." "This is my house," I said. "My name, my son's room." She smoothed the tablecloth, a tablecloth I had never owned, and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "It's not taking if it's family." Noel Ellsworth sat at the other end of the table. 64. Retired telephone lineman. Decades of calluses on hands that were wrapped around a newspaper he was not reading. He did not look up. Not when Lorraine spoke. Not when I answered. Not when the silence after her sentence filled the kitchen like gas from a burner someone forgot to light. His quiet was not neutral. It was load-bearing. He had chosen it the way a man chooses a side without saying a word, and I could feel the weight of his decision in my knees. The percolator on the counter gurgled and clicked. It was sitting where my single-serve machine used to be. I did not ask when they had replaced it. I already understood that asking questions in this kitchen would get me answers shaped like instructions. Where was my husband? That is the question I should have asked first. I asked it last, and the silence before Lorraine's answer told me everything the words did not. He had to run an errand, she said, one beat too slow. But his jacket hung on the hook by the door. His truck keys sat on the counter next to the salt shaker. His lunch container was in the sink, rinsed, with today's date still on the lid. Garrett Ellsworth was not running an errand. He was in this house somewhere, or he had left minutes before I arrived. And either way, he had known about the lock on that nursery door before I ever packed my bag for Rochester. I did not know that yet. Not the full shape of it. That would come later, in text messages and timestamps and a confession in a courthouse hallway that would take my marriage apart in sentences I cannot unhear. But standing in that kitchen, 30 weeks pregnant, surrounded by people who had moved into my home and rearranged it around me like I was the guest, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My husband knew. And he was not in the room because he did not need to be. But to understand what they took, you need to understand what I built and how long it took me to build it. I stood in that kitchen with his jacket on the hook and his keys on the counter and his family arranged around my table like they had been cast in a play, and I thought about the house. Not the house as it was that night, with a deadbolt on the nursery and a percolator where my coffee maker used to be. The house as it was 7 months earlier, when the only person who had a claim to it was me. I started saving when I was 19. Clinical rotations at the community college while my classmates went to football games and spring break. I worked overnights at a surgical center in West Des Moines, 12-hour shifts, putting people under and bringing them back, and every 2 weeks I moved a number from one column to another in a savings account I treated like a second heartbeat. I did not miss a deposit in 10 years, not when my car transmission failed, not when my apartment flooded, not when I married Garrett Ellsworth, 33, a regional claims adjuster who spent his days calculating other people's losses and his evenings telling me I deserved something I was already earning myself. The house cost $385,000, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard with a gate that squeaked, on a street in Ankeny where the neighbors waved, and the school district ranked in the top 10 in Polk County. I put down $62,000, my name on the deed, my signature on the mortgage, no cosigner, no joint account, no one else's credit, no one else's promise, no one else's money. I am telling you the numbers because my in-laws never did the math. And what they could not count, they decided they were owed. The closing was on a Tuesday in March. I sat across from the title agent and signed 41 pages, and the pen was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with its weight. Garrett sat beside me. He did not sign anything. His name was not on a single document. When the title agent slid the keys across the table, I picked them up with both hands like they were breakable, and Garrett looked at the agent and said, "That's my wife." He said it like a toast. I heard pride. I did not hear patience. We took a photo on the porch that afternoon. I have looked at that photo 100 times since October. In it, I am holding the keys with both hands and grinning like a woman who believes she has won something permanent. Garrett stands one step behind me, his hand on my shoulder, his smile easy. His eyes are not on the camera. I did not notice that at the time. I was looking at the keys. 2 weeks after closing, I stood in the bathroom at 5 in the morning and watched a second line appear on a test I had taken because my scrub pants stopped fitting on a Wednesday. I sat on the edge of the tub and did the math. Week 4, maybe 5. Due in late December or early January. A winter baby. A boy, I would learn later, though I already knew the way you know things when your body has been keeping a secret better than your mind. That evening, I walked into the 4th bedroom, the one at the end of the hall with the east-facing window, and I saw the whole room finished before a single piece of furniture existed. The crib against the east wall for morning light, but not direct sun. The rocker by the window, sage green paint, not yellow, because yellow washes out in winter light, and I wanted the room to feel warm in January when he would need it most. I started a list on my phone that night. Crib, mobile, blackout curtains, changing table with storage underneath. That room had a purpose before it had anything in it. I need you to remember that, because in 5 months it would have neither. Garrett laughed when I told him about the crib placement. You're already project managing a baby that's the size of a sesame seed, he said. I laughed too. I thought we were the same kind of happy. I thought his laugh and mine were pointed in the same direction. I did not know that 8 days before our wedding, he had already texted his brother about when to move in. I did not know that the man standing in the nursery doorway, watching me measure the east wall, had already decided that wall belonged to someone else. He never asked to be on the deed. I want you to sit with that for a moment. He never said, should my name be on there too? He never offered to split the down payment. He never questioned the sole title. I took his silence for generosity, for a man comfortable enough in his marriage to let his wife own something outright without it threatening him. I thought I was building a family on bedrock. I was building it on someone else's timeline. In that closing day photo, I am holding the keys, and he is standing 1 step behind me. His hand is on my shoulder. His smile is patient. I thought he was letting me have my moment. He was letting me have the mortgage. 1 month later, his mother would call with a voice like warm bread and a favor that sounded small enough to say yes to. The most dangerous word in the English language is temporary. It never comes with a receipt, and it never leaves on time. Lorraine called on a Tuesday evening in early April while I was sitting cross-legged on the nursery floor comparing paint swatches against the baseboard. Week 8 of the pregnancy. The nausea had settled into a low-grade hum that I could work through if I kept crackers in my scrub pocket, and the house still felt like mine in every room. I had sage green in my left hand and sea foam in my right when the phone rang, and Garrett picked it up before I could wipe the primer dust off my fingers. She explained the situation the way she explained everything, with warmth so thick you could spread it on toast. The house in Ames needed work before they could list it. Plumbing, a roof patch, Noel's back made hotels impossible, and a pregnant daughter-in-law had all that room. Just till it's listed, honey, maybe 6 weeks. Garrett was sitting beside me on the couch. He covered the phone with his palm and said, "It's my mom. Of course they can stay." He said of course before I said anything. He said it the way you say, of course it's raining, or of course water is wet, as though the answer existed before the question. And my opinion was a formality the universe had already handled. I noticed that. I filed it under love. If you have ever watched someone agree to something on your behalf while you were still forming the word, wait, then you already know the sound of a boundary being stepped over in real time. It does not sound like an argument. It sounds like kindness. It sounds like a husband who loves his mother and a wife who does not want to be the person who says no to family. I said yes. I said it out loud, into the phone, with conditions I thought mattered. That night, after Garrett fell asleep, I sat in bed with my laptop and wrote an email to Lorraine and Noel. I kept it friendly. I kept it clear. 8 weeks maximum, a 60-40 split on utilities since they would be adding 2 adults to the water and electric, and the guest room and hall bathroom were theirs, but the nursery and kitchen stayed as they were. I read it twice. I felt smart and guilty in equal measure, the way you feel when you draw a line with someone you are supposed to love without conditions. I pressed send at 11:14. Lorraine replied in 4 minutes. 1 red heart emoji. No words, no signature, no acknowledgement of the timeline, the utility split, or any of the boundaries I had typed out like a contract between strangers. A heart emoji is not a yes. It is not even a promise. It is a warm-colored nothing, a sound that looks like agreement from a distance, but dissolves the moment you hold it up to light. I treated it like a signature because I wanted to believe my mother-in-law spoke the same language I did. She didn't actually agree to the timeline, I said to Garrett the next morning. It's my mother, Darcy. She sent a heart. That's how she says yes. I let it go. I let it go the way I would let a dozen things go over the next 6 months, one small permission at a time, each one reasonable on its own and devastating in sequence. 2 weeks later, a rental truck backed into the driveway with a beeping that woke me from a Saturday nap. I stood on the porch at week 10, my hand on the railing, and watched Noel direct the unloading with the quiet efficiency of a man who had moved before and expected to stay. He carried boxes with both hands and set them down gently, the way you handle things you do not intend to pack again. Lorraine came through the front door carrying her own coffee maker, a 12-cup percolator with a dented lid, and plugged it into the outlet where my single-serve machine had been that morning. She did not ask. She did not move mine to make room. She unplugged it, set it on the counter behind the toaster, and plugged hers in like she was restoring something to its rightful place. Behind the percolator came her own dish set, a ceramic collection with blue trim that she stacked in the cabinet above the stove. My dishes went to the shelf below. Nobody announced this. It simply happened, the way weather happens, without permission and without apology. I stood on the porch and counted boxes as they came off the truck. Suitcases I expected, toiletries, jackets, a few weeks of clothes, sure. But the boxes were labeled kitchen, living room, holidays, master bath. One said Lorraine, quilts in black marker across the side. These were not the possessions of people passing through. This was a household packed with intention, arriving with a permanence that no 6-week timeline could explain. That's a lot of boxes for 6 weeks, Lorraine, I said. She laughed, carrying a brass floor lamp past me with both arms. Oh, you know me. I can't live out of a suitcase like you young people. Noel passed behind her with a toolbox in one hand. She packed the whole kitchen, he said quietly. I told her not to. I counted 31 boxes. Their stay was supposed to last 42 days. The last thing off the truck was a quilt rack. Oak, heavy, the kind you bolt to a wall with anchors and a drill. Lorraine carried it past me on the porch with both arms full and smiled. This'll look perfect in the guest room, she said. Nobody brings a quilt rack for 6 weeks. I came home from a 12-hour shift, and my kitchen had been rearranged by someone who did not ask and did not apologize. The quilt rack had been bolted to the guest room wall within 48 hours of arrival. That should have been the conversation. Instead, I let 3 weeks pass, and when I walked through my own front door at 7 in the evening with swollen feet and a baby pressing on my bladder, I found my pots where my bowls should have been, my bowls where my baking sheets used to live, and my single-serve coffee maker exiled to the back of the pantry behind a bag of flour I did not buy. The percolator sat on the counter like it had been there for years. Lorraine was wiping down the stovetop with a rag I did not recognize. She turned and smiled. I just reorganized a little, she said. Your flow was all wrong, honey. You'll thank me. I liked knowing where my own knives were, I said. She patted my arm, the way you pat a child who has expressed an opinion no one plans to honor. You work too hard to worry about kitchens. Let me handle the house. Let me handle the house. I heard it, and I let it pass because I was tired and pregnant, and the deadline was still on my calendar. 6 weeks. She had 4 left. I could survive 4 weeks of misplaced knives and someone else's coffee. In the living room, Noel's recliner sat angled toward the television. It was a brown leather chair with a manual lever on the side, and it had arrived on the truck with everything else, but I had not seen it placed until now. It faced the TV at an angle that made the couch, my couch, feel like the secondary seat. The TV had not been turned off since they arrived, not muted, not paused, not off. It played from morning until Noel fell asleep in the chair around 10, and then it played to an empty room until someone woke up and started the cycle again. The sound of my own house had been replaced by someone else's noise. Small things, grain of sand things. I let them go one by one because the finish line was still on my calendar, and I still believed calendars meant something in this house. 2 weeks later, at dinner, Lorraine set down her fork and delivered the news with a brightness that did not match its content. The contractor in Ames had found more rot than expected. Subfloor damage, maybe a joist. The listing was pushed back. Looks like you're stuck with us a bit longer, sweetheart, she said. July at the earliest. I did the math in my head. July meant 3 additional months. July meant they would still be here when I hit the 3rd trimester. July meant the nursery timeline I had built on my phone would be running on top of a household that was no longer mine. July, I said. That's 3 months past the original timeline. Garrett did not look up from his plate. These things happen, he said. It's an old house. Have you ever watched someone receive bad news without flinching and realized they had already heard it from someone who was not you? His fork did not pause. His shoulders did not shift. He nodded once, the small nod of a man confirming information, not learning it. Lorraine watched him nod, and something crossed her face, not relief exactly, but the satisfaction of a cue received and returned correctly. They had rehearsed this, maybe not the words, but the rhythm. She delivered, and he absorbed, and I sat between them like an audience member who had wandered onto the stage. I looked at Noel. He was buttering a roll with the concentration of a man diffusing a bomb. He did not look up either. The table was full of people who already knew what I was just finding out, and nobody thought I deserved to hear it first. That night I woke at 1 a.m. to the blue glow of Garrett's phone. He was on his side, facing away from me, his thumbs moving fast across the screen, not scrolling, typing. The speed was wrong for work, too fluid, too familiar, the pace of someone in a conversation he had been having for a while. I shifted in bed. The screen went dark, not the slow dim of a timeout, the instant black of a thumb on the power button, muscle memory, a reflex he had practiced enough that it no longer required thought. Who are you texting at 1 a.m, I said. Work thing, he said. His voice was level. Go back to sleep. But claims adjusters do not text at 1 a.m. They send emails during business hours about water damage and liability limits. They do not type with both thumbs at a speed that makes the phone vibrate against the mattress, and they do not kill the screen before their wife finishes turning over. I had a choice in that dark bedroom. Trust the man beside me, or trust the feeling in my chest that had been building since the percolator appeared on my counter and the quilt rack went up on the wall. I picked the man. I had about 4 more months of that luxury. I lay in the dark, listening to his breathing go steady and slow, the breathing of a man with nothing on his conscience. But his phone sat face down on the nightstand, and the screen had gone dark too fast for someone with nothing to hide. That weekend, a truck I did not recognize pulled into my driveway, and the man who climbed out of it had a duffel bag and no return date. The truck that pulled into my driveway that Saturday belonged to Rhett. He climbed out with a duffel bag in one hand and a six-pack in the other, and by Monday morning, the duffel was in the hall closet and nobody had mentioned Sunday. Lorraine called it a visit. Rhett called me sis, which I had never been called before and did not want to be called now. He arrived with the duffel, a laundry basket full of unwashed clothes, and a gaming console that he connected to the living room television within an hour of walking through the door. The cables snaked across the floor in front of the couch where I used to read at night. By Monday, he was showering before my alarm went off at 6, eating eggs I had bought, and sleeping on the couch under a blanket Lorraine produced from one of the labeled boxes like she had been saving it for exactly this purpose. "When's Rhett heading home?" I asked Lorraine on Tuesday evening, keeping my voice light, keeping the question casual, the way you keep things casual when you already know the answer will make you angry. "Oh, let him rest a few days," she said. "He's between things right now. Between things. Between jobs, between apartments, between whatever life he was supposed to be building somewhere that was not my house. He was 27 years old with a laundry basket and a gaming console and no departure date, and everyone in the house seemed fine with that, except me." From the couch, without looking up from the screen, Rhett said, "Appreciate the hospitality, sis. If someone shows up at your house with a gaming console and a laundry basket, they are not visiting, they are arriving, and the only person who does not know it yet is you." I told myself it was a week. A week became 10 days. 10 days became 2 weeks, and during those 2 weeks, while I was at the hospital, putting patients under and bringing them back, Lorraine finished her quiet expansion into the last room I had left. I came home on a Wednesday to find a sewing machine on my desk. Not beside it. On it. My monitor had been unplugged and relocated to the kitchen table, the cord coiled neatly next to the salt shaker. Storage boxes lined the wall where my filing cabinet used to be. The office door, the only door in the house I could close and still feel like a professional, was open and full of someone else's project. "I just needed somewhere for my machine," Lorraine said from the doorway. "You don't mind, do you? You're barely in here." "I work from home 2 days a week, Lorraine. I present to surgeons from that desk." She was already plugging in the sewing machine. "The kitchen table has better light anyway. Better light, better flow, better for everyone except the woman whose name was on the electric bill." Every room Lorraine touched came back improved in her language and diminished in mine. And the distance between those two vocabularies was the distance between a guest and an occupant. That night, I started a note on my phone. Just dates, just facts. April 14th, percolator replaces coffee maker. May 2nd, timeline extended to July. May 19th, recliner positioned as primary seat. June 4th, Rhett arrives with no departure date. June 11th, office converted to sewing room. I did not know why I was keeping the list. I was not a person who documented things. But something in me had shifted from trusting the situation to recording it, and the shift felt less like suspicion and more like self-defense. I met Bryn Gallagher for coffee on a Saturday morning at a shop near the hospital. Bryn was 30, a pediatric ICU nurse who had worked beside me for 3 years, a woman who noticed everything and forgave almost nothing. She sat across from me with a black coffee and the expression of someone who had already decided what she was going to say, but was waiting for me to finish talking first. I told her everything: the kitchen, the deadline, the recliner, the percolator, the office, Rhett on my couch with his console cables across my floor, the midnight texts, the phone turned face down, the July extension that surprised no one at the table except me. I keep telling myself it's temporary, I said, but temporary keeps getting longer and nobody seems worried except me. Bryn set her coffee down. She did not pick it back up. Can I ask you something you're not going to like? I nodded because I did not trust my voice. Whose side is your husband on? She said. Because I've been listening for 20 minutes and his name hasn't come up once on yours. The coffee shop was loud around us. Someone was grinding beans. A child was laughing near the window. I heard none of it. I heard Bryn's question, the way you hear a smoke detector in the middle of the night, a sound that exists only to tell you something is already burning. I did not answer her, not because I did not know, because saying it out loud would have made it real, and I still had months of pretending left in me. I picked up my cup, and it was cold. I did not remember the last time I had taken a sip. By the end of June, Rhett would stop pretending to be a guest. And the pretending was the only thing keeping me from seeing what was actually happening. I never answered Bryn's question. I carried it home with me like a stone in my pocket, and the following Saturday, it answered itself. A rented box truck backed into my driveway at 9 a.m. Rhett climbed out of the cab, dropped the ramp with a scrape of metal on concrete that woke the neighbor's dog, and started unloading a life. Not a weekend bag, not a few extra things, a workbench, toolboxes with rusted latches, a futon frame in 3 pieces, plastic storage bins labeled in black marker, bedroom, bathroom, garage, kitchen. The same handwriting, the same permanent ink, the same assumption of permanence that had arrived with his mother's boxes 2 months earlier. I met him at the bottom of the ramp. Rhett, this isn't a visit anymore. You're moving in. He carried a brass floor lamp past me without breaking stride. Relax. Just temporary, sis. You sound like a landlord. Lorraine appeared on the porch before I could respond, coffee mug in hand, positioned like a woman who had been expecting this truck and had timed her entrance to intercept me. He's family, Darcy. Where else is he supposed to go? Let me explain something about the word temporary. It only works if at least one person in the room still believes it has an expiration date. Standing on my own driveway at 20 weeks pregnant, watching my brother-in-law carry a workbench into a house he did not own, I understood that nobody in this family had ever believed in that expiration date except me. The word had not been a promise. It had been a sedative, administered in small doses to keep me quiet while the rooms filled up around me. By noon, the truck was empty and returned. Rhett's belongings occupied the hallway, the living room corner, and the coat closet I used to keep my hospital bag in. I stepped over a box of socket wrenches to get to my own bathroom. I moved a stack of automotive magazines off the kitchen counter to make lunch. Every surface I touched had been claimed by someone who had contributed nothing to the mortgage, the utilities, or the groceries, and when I opened the refrigerator to make a sandwich, I found a 12-pack of beer on the shelf where I kept my prenatal vitamins. That evening, I called a house meeting. I had spent the afternoon at the kitchen table with my laptop, typing a 1-page household plan that I printed 5 times on the printer Lorraine had not yet relocated. Chore rotation, utility contribution, split proportionally. An apartment search check-in for Rhett every Sunday with a target move-out of mid-August, a grocery budget, a single-page, 12-point font, reasonable by any standard that did not begin and end with the phrase, "We are family." I set the 5 copies on the kitchen table, 1 at each place setting, and waited for everyone to sit down. Have you ever printed 5 copies of your own dignity and watched them disappear under a pizza box by 8 o'clock, because that is exactly what happened. Rhett picked his copy up, read the first line, and grinned across the table at Lorraine. "She made us a PowerPoint," he said. Lorraine did not laugh. She did something worse. She put her hand flat on the page in front of her, palm down, fingers spread, the way you press a bandage over a wound you do not intend to treat. "Sweetheart," she said, "we don't do contracts in this family. We take care of each other." I looked at Noel. He was studying his placemat with the same concentration he had given his newspaper in April, the same deliberate absence he had perfected over decades of letting Lorraine speak for both of them. His silence was not neutrality, it was architecture. It held the room in place so Lorraine could move through it unopposed. I looked at my husband. Garrett was studying his hands, not clenched, not open, just resting on the table in front of his unsigned copy, palms down, like a man waiting for someone to tell him what to do with them. He did not look at me. He did not look at his mother. He existed in the space between the two of us like a man who had already chosen but wanted the room to believe he was still deciding. "Garrett," I said, just his name, just one word, loaded with everything Bryn had asked me at the coffee shop. He looked up. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He picked up his water glass and drank, and by the time he set it down, Lorraine had already moved the conversation to what to order for dinner. By 8 o'clock, my plan sat under a pizza box, grease soaking through the first page. Not one copy had been signed. Not one line had been discussed. The conversation had moved past me, the way water moves past a stone, without resistance, without acknowledgement, without the slightest indication that the stone had ever been in the current. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed in the small room I had started sleeping in when the master bedroom began to feel like shared territory. I opened my phone and added to the note, June 28th, proposed household plan, 5 copies. Rhett laughed. Lorraine refused. Noel silent. Garrett silent. No signatures. I looked around that table one last time before I stood up. 5 people in my house, eating food I bought. Not one of them had signed my plan. And the one who had promised to stand beside me for the rest of his life had not stood beside me for a single sentence. 3 days after my household plan disappeared under a pizza box, my brother-in-law stood at the head of my table, my chair, by the way, and divided my house like a man cutting a cake he had not paid for. Lorraine had cooked a roast. I need you to understand that detail because it matters. She cooked it in my oven on a rack I had received as a wedding gift, using a recipe she brought from the house she had already sold in Ames, and the whole kitchen smelled like her, not like mine, like hers. The table was set with her dishes, the blue-trimmed ones that had replaced mine in the cabinet above the stove. I sat in the chair closest to the counter because Rhett was in mine, and nobody had noticed the swap because nobody was supposed to. After the roast was cleared and the plates were still wet with gravy, Rhett stood up. He did not push his chair back. He rose the way a man rises when he has rehearsed what he is about to say and wants the room to feel the height of him. "All right," he said. "Let's just lay it out so nobody's confused." Ein used his hand to draw invisible lines in the air, mapping the house from memory like a man presenting a development plan to investors. Upstairs was his. The nursery, my son's room, was his bedroom. The hallway bathroom was his. The backyard shed area was his workshop. He carved the air with the flat of his palm, assigning square footage with the casual authority of someone who had never once asked permission for any of it. Then he grinned at me. "You've still got the kitchen," he said, "and honestly, you're the cook around here anyway." It was not taking if it was family. That sentence again, delivered over a roast I paid for, in a house I owned, at a table I had carried through the front door with my own arms the day I moved in. "Rhett," I said, "this is my house. Come on, Darcy." He leaned back, arms wide, the posture of a man who believes generosity and entitlement are the same word. It's not taking if it's family. I waited for someone to laugh. I waited for a single voice at that table to say what was objectively true, that a man with no job, no lease, and no legal claim to anything within these walls had just awarded himself half a house he did not own. It was absurd. It was comedy. Surely someone at this table could hear that. Lorraine nodded. Not the cautious nod of a woman considering, the approving nod of a woman confirming. "That sounds sensible," she said. "Everyone has their own space." Noel studied a spot 6 inches above his plate and did not blink for 11 seconds. I counted. I had started counting things in this house the way I counted vitals at work, not because I wanted to, but because the numbers were the only things that did not lie to me. When every person at your table agrees that what is yours is negotiable, what exactly are you supposed to do with the fork in your hand? You cannot argue with consensus. You cannot fight a room that has already decided the outcome before you sat down. Lorraine had approved it. Noel had absorbed it. Rhett had announced it. And Garrett, my husband, the man whose ring was on my finger and whose name was not on my deed, sat with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the tablecloth and contributed nothing, not a word, not a glance, not the smallest friction of dissent. I pushed my chair back. I did not excuse myself. I stopped excusing myself in this house around the 3rd week of June, when I realized that excusing yourself implies you owe the room an explanation, and I did not owe this room anything. I climbed the stairs. The nursery door was open. I stood in the doorway and looked at the room I had measured for a crib 3 months earlier, the east wall I had chosen for morning light, the window where I had imagined a rocker and a view of the backyard in winter. Rhett's duffel bag sat on the floor beneath that window, not beside it, beneath it, in the exact spot where the crib was supposed to go. His jacket hung over the closet door, and underneath it, half covered like something being slowly erased, were the paint swatches I had taped to the wall in April. Sage green, sea foam, pale yellow. The colors I had chosen the week I found out I was having a boy. I put my hand on my belly. My son kicked against my palm, one solid push, and I understood something with a clarity that felt like cold water on a burn. Nobody in this house was going to protect his room except me. Not Lorraine, who had approved the annexation. Not Noel, who had perfected the art of watching. Not Garrett, who had sat at that table and let his brother give away our child's room without opening his mouth. Rhett's duffel bag sat where the crib should have been. My paint swatches hid beneath his jacket like evidence someone had started to bury. That room was for my son, and not one person downstairs had said a single word against giving it away. That night, behind a closed bedroom door, I was going to ask my husband the question Bryn had asked me, and this time I was not going to let him answer with silence. I closed the bedroom door that night and asked my husband a question I already knew the answer to. I just needed to hear him say it out loud. "Your brother gave away our son's room tonight," I said. "He stood at my table, in my chair, and carved up my house like a Thanksgiving turkey, and you sat there and looked at your hands." Garrett was sitting on the edge of the bed, unlacing his boots. He did not stop. He did not look up. "I'm in the middle, Darcy. What do you want me to do? Blow up my own family?" "I'm your family. I'm carrying your child. That room upstairs is supposed to be his nursery, and your brother put his duffel bag where the crib goes, and you nodded along like someone reading a menu." I didn't nod. "You didn't speak. That's worse." He pulled off his boot and set it on the floor beside the other one, lined up perfectly, toes pointed forward. The action of a man who keeps his small world in order so he does not have to face the large one he is dismantling. You're not in the middle, Garrett, I said. The middle is a place people stand when they don't want to be blamed for the side they already picked. He looked at me then, not with anger, with the patient exhaustion of a man who had been managing 2 conversations for months, the one with me and the one without me, and was tired of keeping them separate. He said nothing. He turned off his lamp and lay down with his back to me, and the bedroom went dark. Being in the middle is not a position. It is an alibi. And my husband had been building his since before I ever agreed to let his parents through my front door. A week later, Rhett escalated. He dragged a workbench and 3 storage bins through the back door and set them up in the yard where my garden tools had been. My trowels and kneeling pad ended up in a pile by the fence. I came home from a Saturday shift to find my backyard reorganized the way my kitchen had been reorganized, the way my office had been reorganized, without permission, without discussion, without the slightest acknowledgement that the space belonged to someone else. I called the non-emergency line at the Ankeny Police Department. I was 22 weeks pregnant. I sat on my front porch with the phone against my ear and explained the situation to a dispatcher who asked me to slow down twice. Within an hour, a patrol car pulled into my driveway. Officer Hadley was about my age, polite, with his hands tucked into his vest, the way officers do when they are listening and not yet acting. He came inside. He looked at the guest room, the kitchen, Rhett's belongings in the nursery. He spoke with Lorraine, who offered him coffee. He spoke with Rhett, who called the whole thing a misunderstanding. He spoke with Noel, who said almost nothing. Then he came back out to the porch where I was waiting and delivered the news with the careful voice of a man who had given this speech before, in driveways nicer than mine. "They've got mail coming here," he said. "Belongings established in multiple rooms. Under Iowa law, that makes them residents of the home, regardless of whose name is on the deed." "It's my house," I said. "My name. I'm the only one on the mortgage." "I understand, ma'am." He was kind about it. He had seen this before. "But the way this works, you'd have to evict them, formally, through the courts, like a landlord." The officer was kind about it. He had seen this movie before. "Civil matter, ma'am. I am sorry." He gave me a card with the Polk County Courthouse number on the back and suggested I contact a family attorney. Then he drove away in a cruiser that had been parked in my driveway for 40 minutes and had not changed a single thing. Every fast, satisfying option you are imagining right now, the changed locks, the bags on the lawn, the scene at the curb where I drag everything out and stand there with my arms crossed while the neighbors watch, every single one of those options would have handed my brother-in-law a lawsuit and made me the criminal in my own home. If I changed the locks, I was performing an illegal lockout. If I moved their belongings, I was destroying or converting tenant property. If I shut off the water or turned off the electricity, I was engaging in constructive eviction, which in Iowa carries civil penalties. The law that protected my house was the same law protecting the people taking it. The system had been designed to prevent landlords from throwing tenants into the street, and it could not tell the difference between a landlord and a pregnant woman whose in-laws had moved into her nursery. I stood on my porch after the cruiser turned the corner and said the word out loud, "Evict." It dropped into my quiet street like a stone through a window. I was 22 weeks pregnant, standing on a porch I had paid for, and the legal system had just told me the fastest path to my own nursery was a courtroom. I laughed once, short, unfunny. Then I stopped laughing because the pieces were arranging themselves into a shape I did not want to see. The mail forwarding, the 31 boxes, Lorraine's heart emoji instead of a signature, Garrett's unsurprised face at every escalation. None of it was accidental. All of it was architecture. I needed to understand the position I was in clearly, because I need you to see it too, before I tell you what I did next. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I did something small that turned out to be the hinge of my entire life. I pulled a red folder from the office supplies Lorraine had not yet relocated, sat down at the dining table in the gray light before 6, and started building a case against my own family. The percolator gurgled on the counter like a clock I had not set. I worked underneath its sound, printing documents on the printer in the hallway, moving quietly in socks on my own hardwood floors, the way a woman moves when she no longer feels safe making noise in her own house. The deed came first, my name alone on every page. Then the closing documents from March. Then the mortgage statements, 12 months of payments drawn from a single account that belonged to a single person. Then the email I had sent to Lorraine in April with the 8-week deadline and the utility split. Then the reply, a red heart, time-stamped, no words attached. I printed that heart on a full sheet of paper and stared at it. That was the entire lease agreement my mother-in-law had signed. One symbol, no commitment, no acknowledgement of a single term I had set. I added the utility bills showing the spike after 4 adults became 5. I added the photographs I had taken of the nursery deadbolt, of Rhett's belongings in the backyard, of the sewing machine on my desk. I added the phone notes, typed and printed, every date and every incident since April, 10 minutes of quiet paperwork. My hands were steady. That was the part that told me something in me had already decided. I did not file the folder in the house. There was not a single drawer, closet, or shelf I trusted to stay mine long enough to matter. I walked outside in my work scrubs, opened the trunk of my car, lifted the cargo mat, and laid the red folder flat in the wheel well next to the spare tire. My documents were now safer in a hospital parking garage than inside my own home. If that does not tell you everything about where I was living, nothing will. The folder weighed maybe 2 pounds. Carrying it across that parking garage at lunch the following week, walking into a building I had never entered before, it was the heaviest thing I have ever lifted. Celeste Rawlings was 52 years old, a landlord-tenant attorney with reading glasses on a beaded chain and an office on the 3rd floor of a building that overlooked the Polk County Courthouse. She had been practicing property law for 23 years, and she went through my red folder page by page without changing her expression once. She turned each document the way a surgeon turns an instrument, no hurry, no waste, no emotion, until the assessment was complete. She gave me the bad news first. Nothing would be fast. Iowa treated the Ellsworths as tenants at will, which meant there was a legal staircase with no elevator. Step 1, a written 30-day notice terminating their permission to remain. Step 2, a 3-day statutory notice if they did not leave. Step 3, filing a forcible entry and detainer action at the courthouse across the street. Step 4, a hearing. Step 5, if they still refused, a writ of removal enforced by the sheriff. 8 to 12 weeks minimum if everything went cleanly. Her retainer was $2,500. If you are wondering why I did not just change the locks and deal with the consequences, the officer on my porch had already answered that question, and I had been pregnant long enough to know that consequences last longer than anger. Then Celeste gave me the good news. She set the folder down, removed her reading glasses, and folded her hands on the desk. Sole title, she said. No lease. No rent ever paid. Proper documentation of every notice and every violation. Screenshots with timestamps. She tapped the folder with one finger. Legally, this is the cleanest case I'll see this month. She paused. The courthouse sat framed in the window behind her, granite and glass, the place where my case would eventually be heard by a magistrate who did not know my name or my family or the color I had chosen for my son's nursery walls. Emotionally, she said, it's the worst kind I do. She looked at me the way I imagined a surgeon looks at a patient before marking the incision line, compassionate, certain, and already past the point of pretending it would not leave a scar. Miss Ellsworth, she said, capping her pen with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Almost nobody serves their own mother-in-law. Whatever the outcome of this process, the family you had before the papers, that version ends. You understand that. Are you sure? I looked past her at the courthouse. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about Lorraine smoothing tablecloths and Noel studying his hands and Garrett turning off his lamp with his back to me. I thought about Rhett's duffel bag under the nursery window and my paint swatches disappearing under his jacket. I thought about my son, who was 23 weeks along and the size of a papaya, and had no idea that the room I had chosen for him was occupied by a man who called me sis. I need one more week, I told her, not because I doubted the law, because I wanted to give my family one last chance to be my family. That last chance would cost me more than the retainer. I gave my family one last chance to be worth the word. What they gave me back was a price tag for my own house. 1 week after sitting in Celeste's office, I called everyone to the kitchen table. I laid it out simply. $2,000 toward a deposit on Rhett's apartment, anywhere he chose. Movers covered, my expense. Lorraine and Noel could stay as long as the Ames house genuinely needed. All I wanted was the nursery back and a move-out date for Rhett. 1 room, 1 brother, 1 date on a calendar. Rhett sat across from me with his arms crossed and a small patient smile. He let me finish. He waited 2 beats. Then he leaned forward. Or, he said, simpler option. You add Garrett to the deed. For the baby's stability, it's 1 signature, Darcy. My brother-in-law sat in my kitchen and priced my house like a yard sale lamp. Adding Garrett to the deed would convert my separate property into marital property. Marital property is divisible. Divisible property is leverage. 1 signature, and every person at that table would have a claim to the house I had paid for alone before I married anyone. Lorraine nodded before Rhett finished talking. Not the slow nod of a woman considering, the immediate nod of a woman who had already discussed this in a conversation I had not been invited to. It makes sense, Darcy, she said. Garrett's name on the deed protects everyone, especially the baby. I looked at Garrett. He was sitting to my left, hands around a coffee mug, eyes on the table. He had not moved when Rhett made the counteroffer. Not a blink, not a shift, not an inhale. The absence of surprise on his face was the loudest sound in the room. No, I said. 1 word. Whole. Nothing softening it. No qualifier. No, I'll think about it. Just no. Delivered into a kitchen full of people who had been waiting for me to say yes to something for 4 months. I had never said the word that way in my adult life. It tasted like metal, and it felt like standing up after sitting too long in a chair someone else had chosen. Do not make us choose, Darcy. That is what Lorraine said next. She set her coffee cup down with deliberate weight and did not look up. Don't make us choose. You won't like it. That sentence has a shape. It looks like a warning, but hold it up to the light, and it is a confession. They had already chosen. The choosing had not included me. The warning was not about what might happen. It was about what had already happened in rooms I was not in conversations I was not part of, on phones that went dark when I shifted in bed. Rhett uncrossed his arms and crossed them again, resettling into patience. Noel was not present. He had excused himself before the conversation started, as though someone had told him he would not want to witness what was coming. And Garrett sat with his hands around his mug and said nothing, not a word, not even my name. I stood up. I left my offer on the table the way I had left my household plan under the pizza box weeks before. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house rearrange itself around my absence. Lorraine murmuring, Rhett's chair scraping, the television resuming. That night I watched my husband brush his teeth in the bathroom mirror. He had not flinched when his brother asked for half my house. Either he had no opinion about the biggest financial decision of our marriage, or he had already formed one, just not with me. I watched his face the way I read monitors at work, looking for the data, not the comfort. Love is supposed to be the thing you do not have to monitor. When you start reading your husband's face like a vital sign, the patient is already critical. After he fell asleep, I went outside. I sat in my car in my own driveway with the engine off and the overhead light on. I took the retainer agreement from the glove box, smoothed it against the steering wheel, and signed my name on the line Celeste had marked with a yellow tab. My hands did not shake. That was the part that scared me, not the decision, the steadiness. The woman who would have folded a month ago was already gone, and the one replacing her was reading her husband's face like a chart and signing legal documents against a steering wheel at midnight. I drove to a mailbox 2 blocks away and dropped the envelope through the slot. Then I drove home, parked in my driveway, and went inside a house that was still mine on paper and already lost in every other way that mattered. 2 weeks later, I would serve my in-laws at the table where they had laughed off my plan. And what happened next is the part of this story they still will not say out loud. On August 28th, I cooked dinner for 6 people I was about to serve with eviction notices, and I set the table with the good plates because some things deserved to be done properly. The retainer had been mailed. The certified copies had gone out that morning. Celeste was clear. The mail alone was legally sufficient. But I decided my in-laws would not learn about this from a carrier. They would hear it from me at the table where they had given away my son's room and laughed off my household plan and told me contracts were for strangers. I want you to understand what it takes to cook a meal for people you are about to hand legal papers to. It takes the same hands, the same stove, the same cutting board. It takes a version of yourself you did not know existed until you needed her. I roasted a chicken. I made garlic potatoes. I filled a water pitcher and set it in the center of the table next to a salt shaker and 3 white envelopes. Bryn stood by the counter the entire meal. She had taken the evening off and driven 40 minutes because I asked her to witness the service. She leaned against the counter with her arms folded and her phone in her scrub pocket, and she did not eat. She watched. Dinner passed the way. Every dinner in that house passed. Lorraine complimented the chicken. Rhett ate seconds without thanking anyone. Noel cut his food into small pieces and said nothing. Garrett sat beside me and talked about a claim he was processing at work. The table sounded normal. The envelope sat next to the water pitcher like place cards at a wedding nobody had planned. When the plates were cleared, I set 1 envelope in front of Lorraine, 1 in front of Noel, and 1 in front of Rhett. I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the table, the chair Rhett had claimed weeks ago, and I said the only sentence I had rehearsed. I love you, and in 30 days, this stops being your address. 3 reactions, 3 people, 3 versions of the same news landing on 3 different surfaces. Lorraine opened her envelope, read 2 lines, and came up out of her chair with a sound that was half sob and half fury, a sound I had never heard from a woman who controlled every room she entered. "You're doing this to your own family?" she said, her voice climbing. "This family is cursed the day you bought this house." Rhett did not open his all the way. He pulled the paper out, glanced at the header, and held my eyes while he tore it clean in half. Slowly, one long rip down the center, the sound of it cutting through Lorraine's voice like a blade through paper, which is exactly what it was. He set the halves on the table and smiled. "Cute," he said. My mother-in-law screamed, my brother-in-law laughed, and my father-in-law did something I did not expect. Noel opened his envelope with his thumb, unfolded the notice, and read every word, front and back, slowly. His lips did not move, but his eyes tracked each line the way a man reads something he has been waiting to receive. When he finished, he folded the paper into quarters, precise as a letter going into a mailbox, and tucked it into his shirt pocket behind his reading glasses. Then he stood up and began clearing the dishes. I could not tell yet which one of them was going to break my heart. Lorraine stormed to the guest room and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the photographs in the hallway. Rhett returned to the couch and turned on his game, volume up, as though nothing had happened. Noel washed 3 plates and a serving dish without speaking, dried them with a towel I did not recognize, and went upstairs. The kitchen went quiet. Bryn unfolded her arms. "You okay?" she said. "I don't know yet. Ask me in 30 days. If you have ever loved someone enough to serve them papers at a table you set with the good plates, then you know this is not cruelty. It is the last thing that looks like caring before caring has to become something harder. I had cooked them a meal. I had looked them in the eye. I had said, 'I love you,' before I said the rest. I do not know what else a person is supposed to do when the people eating her food are the same people taking her house." Bryn left at 9. I stood in the kitchen alone, the torn halves of Rhett's notice still on the table beside the salt shaker. Celeste had told me this would happen. "Torn paper is still served paper," she had said. The law did not care whether Rhett grinned or Lorraine wept or Noel folded his into quarters like a man saving a receipt. The 30-day clock was running, but the reaction I had not prepared for came 2 hours later. Not from the guest room, not from the couch, from behind my own bedroom door, from the one person whose name was not on any of those envelopes. Garrett had been silent through the entire dinner. He had not opened an envelope because there was none for him. He was not a tenant. He was my husband. And what he said to me that night, behind a closed door with the hallway dark, and his family settling into a house they had 30 days to leave, is the thing that cracked us open. Garrett closed the bedroom door behind him like a man entering a room he intended to win. He did not knock. He did not ease it shut. He pulled it closed with his full hand and turned to face me with a fury I had never seen in 5 years of knowing him. "You served my mother," he said, "at a dinner table, with a witness standing by the counter like she's a stranger you're suing." "She is someone I'm suing," I said. "That's what a 30-day notice means. You humiliated her in her own kitchen, my table, my plates, my house, Garrett." He paced 2 steps toward the window and 2 steps back, his hands flexing at his sides. "Call your lawyer tomorrow. Pull the notices, or this marriage has a real problem." When someone threatens your marriage to protect the people who are stealing from you, they are not choosing between 2 loyalties. They are telling you which one was always real. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands on my knees and watched my husband wear a groove in the carpet, and I understood that the man I had married was not caught in the middle. He was standing exactly where he had always been standing. The middle was just the name he had given it, so nobody would call it what it was. "Your brother tore his notice in half and smiled," I said. "Your mother called my house cursed. Tell me who is treating who like a stranger." They're scared, Darcy. You backed them into a corner. They've been in my house for 3 months. They took my son's room. They asked for half the deed. Which corner are they in, exactly? He stopped pacing. He stood at the foot of the bed and looked at me with something that might have been love or might have been calculation, and I could no longer tell the difference. Did you know Rhett was going to ask for the deed? I said. He pulled his shirt over his head. He folded it. He set it on the dresser. He got into bed and turned off his lamp without answering. In a marriage, the things you do not deny are the things that are true. I lay beside my husband in the dark and felt the space between us like a third person in the bed, someone neither of us had invited, but both of us had built. The sheets on his side were cold by the time I reached across to check. He was facing the wall. I was facing the ceiling. We lay in that bed like two people on opposite sides of a river that had been rising for months, close enough to hear each other breathe, too far apart to touch. 5 weeks passed in cold truce. The 30-day notices expired without a single bag packed. Celeste filed the extension and the statutory follow-up. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke about it. The house operated like a hospital ward where every patient knows the diagnosis, but nobody says the word out loud. Lorraine cooked in silence. Rhett played his games with the volume higher. Noel fixed a dripping faucet in the hall bathroom and left his toolbox by the door, like a man keeping his hands busy so his conscience would not catch up. In early September, at week 30 of the pregnancy, I left for a scheduled 3-day assignment at a clinic affiliated with Mayo in Rochester, Minnesota. The trip had been on my calendar for months. I could not cancel. The facility had booked me in June, before the notices, before the retainer, before the bedroom, stopped being a place I slept and became a place I survived. Garrett walked me to the car. He carried my suitcase and set it in the trunk. He closed the trunk and stood at the bumper. He did not walk to the end of the driveway. He did not wave from the porch. He stood at the bumper and watched me back out, and I noticed the way you notice a door left unlocked, not because you see it open, but because something in your body tells you it should be closed. I filed it. I drove north. 3 hours on Interstate 35, then east on 90, then north again through southern Minnesota, where the fields were turning gold, and the sky was the kind of wide that makes you feel like the only person alive. My phone sat in the console. Bryn's text came through somewhere near Albert Lee. Keep your phone close this weekend. I've got a bad feeling. I did not ask what she meant. I drove. I checked into the hotel at 4 in the afternoon, set my phone on the nightstand, and stood at the window looking out at a parking lot in a city that was not mine. I was 3 hours north and 1,000 miles from the truth. Back in my house, in a room I had painted for my son, someone was measuring the nursery door for hardware I had not purchased and did not authorize. I would not know until Monday. By then, the crib would be in the basement. My paint swatches would be under someone else's jacket, and a brass deadbolt would be gleaming on a door that had never needed a lock until the people inside decided it belonged to them. Monday evening, I would come home, and everything I found would be exactly what you heard at the beginning of this story, except now you know what it cost. You already know what I came home to. You heard it at the beginning of this story, the dark window, the missing curtains, the truck in my spot. But now you know what it cost to get there, and I need you to see what happened next. I pulled into the driveway Monday evening at week 30. Rochester was still in my bones. 3 days of sterile hallways and controlled dosages and the clean anonymity of a hotel room where nobody was rearranging my things while I slept. The drive south had taken 4 hours because I stopped once at a rest area to press my forehead against the steering wheel and breathe. Rhett's truck sat in my parking spot. The nursery window was dark. The curtains were gone, not drawn, gone. I had seen this before, in the opening minutes of the worst night of my life. But this time, I carried 6 months behind me. The email with the red heart, the boxes labeled by room, the midnight texts, the officer on my porch, the plan laughed off the table, the retainer signed against a steering wheel. Every one of those things was in the driveway with me as I dragged my suitcase past his truck and climbed the porch steps. The stairs told me everything before I reached the top. Crib rails leaned against the hallway wall. Boxes of baby supplies sat stacked outside the nursery door, my name written across them in handwriting that was not mine. Someone had folded my son's things with hands that had no right to touch them and labeled the boxes like they were shipping me out of my own house. You read this scene once already, but now you know about the percolator and the quilt rack and the 31 boxes. You know about the kitchen table where my plan disappeared under a pizza box and the bedroom where my husband answered my question by turning off his lamp. Every one of those details was in that hallway with me, stacked against the wall like evidence nobody intended to present. The brass deadbolt caught the hallway light. New, shiny, drilled into a doorframe that had never had a lock. I knocked because there was nothing else to do in my own house with a locked door in front of me. Rhett opened it shirtless, a game playing on a television that had not been in this room on Friday. Behind him, I could see his weight bench where the crib should have been, duffel bags on the floor, my paint swatches half buried under his jacket on the closet door. He leaned against the frame and looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who arrived on the wrong day. "Oh, hey," he said. "You're back. We figured you wouldn't mind. You're barely here anyway." I went downstairs. I went downstairs because going downstairs was the only direction left that did not involve putting my hands on a locked door and screaming. Lorraine and Noelle sat at the kitchen table with coffee from the percolator. Lorraine's eyes flicked to the ceiling and back before she spoke. That flick. I had seen it once before, the night I came home to the rearranged kitchen. It was her tell, the involuntary glance of a woman who already knows what you are about to discover. "Rhett needed proper space," she said. "You're the pregnant one. You understand better than anyone that a body needs room." "That room is for my son," I said. "I want it back by Sunday." She smoothed the tablecloth, the same motion, the same speed, the same tablecloth that was not mine. "It's not taking if it's family, Darcy. We've been over this." She said it again, the exact same words, the exact same gesture, like a woman who had rehearsed a line until it stopped sounding like theft and started sounding like scripture. Noel studied his newspaper. He did not look up. He had perfected the art of being present without being accountable, and I was past the point of expecting anything else from a man who had watched this pattern destroy his own sister decades before he watched it happen to me. I did not know about Eleanor yet. That would come later. "Where's Garrett?" I said. Lorraine paused, one beat too long. He had to run out, some work thing. But his work bag sat slumped by the front door. The leather strap twisted the way it always twisted when he dropped it after a shift. His lunch container sat in the sink, rinsed, the lid still damp. He had been in this house today. He had been here when the deadbolt was drilled, when the crib was carried down the stairs, when my paint swatches vanished under his brother's jacket. I pulled out my phone and called him. 2 rings, then voicemail. Have you ever called someone who was supposed to be your partner and heard 2 rings and then silence? 2 rings means they looked at the screen. Silence means they pressed decline. That is not a phone in a pocket. That is a man watching his wife's name appear and choosing not to answer. His jacket was gone from the hook. His keys were gone from the counter. But his work bag was by the door and his lunch was in the sink. He had not left for work. He had left for me. He had timed his exit to the hour so he would not have to be in the room when I found out what he had helped arrange. 2 days later, I would pick up his phone to plug it in, and the screen would show me exactly how long he had been planning this. I was not looking for proof. I was looking for the charger. 2 nights after the confrontation, Garrett fell asleep on the couch with the television on and his phone balanced on the armrest. I came downstairs at 11 because I could not sleep, and the house was too quiet in the wrong way, the kind of quiet that hums with things unsaid. His phone buzzed once against the leather. The screen lit up with a notification preview, and the battery icon in the corner flashed red, 4%. I picked it up the way you pick up a shoe in the hallway. Automatic, thoughtless, married. I was going to plug it in and go back to bed. That was the plan. That was the entire scope of my intention at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, 30 weeks pregnant, standing 3 feet from my sleeping husband in a house full of people who had been lying to me for 7 months. The notification was from Rhett. The preview showed one line of text, truncated, glowing against the dark lock screen. It read, "Once things settle, we get your name on the deed and..." I did not breathe for 11 seconds. I know because I counted the way I count when a patient's vitals spike, and I need to stay steady long enough to act. 11 seconds of standing in my own living room with my husband's phone in my hand and a sentence fragment that rearranged my entire marriage. A phone at 4% is a dying thing. It tells one last secret with its final breath, and then it goes dark. I had maybe 2 minutes of battery left. I swiped. Before I tell you what I read on that screen, I need you to hear me. Drop a comment right now. Did you see this coming, or did you trust him too? Some details ahead are dramatized to convey what this felt like from the inside. The truth beneath them is what matters. If this is not for you, you can stop here. But if you want to know what Garrett wrote in March, keep listening. The thread between Garrett and Rhett went back months. I scrolled with my thumb, moving fast, reading faster, the screen dimming every few seconds as the battery died, and I tapped it awake again. The messages were not long. They did not need to be. They were short, practical, coordinated, the language of 2 men executing a plan they had agreed on long before I became suspicious. The earliest message I found was dated March 14th. Our wedding was March 22nd. 8 days. 8 days before he stood beside me at the altar and said the words. The March text was from Garrett to Rhett. After the honeymoon, give it a month so it looks organic. Mom and Dad first, then you. I need you to understand. He did not fall into this. There was no slippery slope, no gradual corruption, no moment where a good man made one bad choice and then another. The first text in this thread was sent 8 days before he stood at the altar and promised me a partnership. He had planned the invasion of my home before he had finished planning the reception. I kept scrolling. June. Rhett had written, "What about the nursery? She's already painting it." Garrett's reply sat underneath it in a blue bubble. Casual, 7 words. "She'll be too pregnant to fight it by fall." That was my husband, talking about me, to his brother, about my body, about my house, about my son. He had calculated my pregnancy like a variable in a spreadsheet, measured my capacity for resistance against my gestational week, and concluded that by the 3rd trimester, I would be too exhausted, too hormonal, too physically compromised to fight back. He had weaponized the baby I was carrying against the house I had bought for him. September, the thread continued. "She's in Rochester, the 12th through 15th, Garrett had written. "Do the lock then. I'll be out of the house by 5. There it was, the deadbolt on the nursery door, the timed absence, the declined phone call, the jacket missing from the hook while the work bag sat by the door. every detail from Monday night, every clue I had pieced together standing in my own kitchen, confirmed in 3 lines of text on a phone I had picked up to charge. The screen went black. 4%, then 3, then dead. I stood in the dark living room holding a phone that had just rewritten my marriage from the first page. Garrett's breathing was steady on the couch. The television played to no one. The charger cable hung from the end table, unplugged, the thing I had come downstairs to use. I did not plug it in. I set the phone back on the armrest, screen down, exactly where it had been. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and put my hands on my knees and stared at the wall. The last text I had read was dated March 14th. Our wedding was March 22nd. He had coordinated the takeover of my home 8 days before he stood beside me and said, "I do." He knew before I had even unpacked my wedding dress. Tomorrow morning, I would drive to Ames, and what I found at the house he claimed to be renovating would be the last lie left standing. I put his phone on the kitchen table between the salt shaker and the butter dish, screen up, thread open, and I waited for him to sit down. Garrett came downstairs at 7:30. He poured coffee. He opened the refrigerator and stood there for a moment, the way he always did, scanning shelves without committing. Then he pulled out the chair, sat, and looked down. His face went through 3 stages in less than 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, and a calm so rehearsed it looked like it had been waiting in a drawer. He picked the phone up. He read. He set it back down. "I was trying to keep the peace, Darcy," he said. "You don't know what my family's like when they don't get what they want." "You planned this before the wedding," I said, "before the honeymoon, before you said I do." It got out of hand. I didn't think they'd take the nursery. Have you ever watched someone apologize without saying the word sorry for the right thing? He was sorry I found the texts. He was sorry the phone had been at 4% instead of dead. He was sorry the notification had been visible on the lock screen. He was not sorry for the plan. He was not sorry for the timing. He was not sorry for the sentence about my body and my pregnancy and my capacity to resist. He apologized for getting caught, and he framed the catching as the crime. "It got out of hand" is not an apology. It is a weather report. It describes a condition without accepting a cause. I sat across from the man I had married and listened to him explain himself, the way he explained claims at work, passively, structurally, with the damage attributed to circumstances rather than decisions. I did not argue. I had argued at this table before, and the pages had ended up under a pizza box. I stood up, took my coffee to the bedroom, and called Sabine Prescott. Sabine was 48, a family law attorney in Des Moines, with a direct phone manner and a client roster built entirely on property disputes. She answered on the second ring. I told her the short version: sole title, in-laws entrenched, husband complicit, texts proving premeditation. She asked 3 questions. Was my name the only one on the deed? Yes. Had any written lease or rent agreement ever existed? No. Had I already retained a landlord-tenant attorney for the eviction? Yes. Celeste Rawlings, retainer signed in August. Good, she said. Then I handle the marriage side. The house is yours. Premarital asset, sole title, purchased with funds earned before the marriage. No one gets added to that deed without your signature, and I am going to make sure no one asks for it again. She said the word yours 3 times in 2 minutes. I had not heard it spoken that way in months, as a legal fact, not a favor, not a concession, not something I needed to defend at a kitchen table full of people who disagreed. Sabine Prescott said yours the way nobody in that house had said it since April, like it was carved in granite, like it was already settled. Separate your finances today, she said. Open a new account at a different bank. Move your direct deposit. Do not add Garrett to anything. Do not sign anything. We start with a formal notice to vacate, 30 days, then we escalate. And Darcy, screenshot those texts before he deletes them. I had already screenshotted them at 3 in the morning. 12 images saved to a folder on my phone labeled medical records because I did not trust any label that told the truth. 3 days later, I was in the cereal aisle at the grocery store near our house when a woman I did not recognize waved at me from the produce section. She crossed the aisle with a cart and a smile and introduced herself as a former neighbor of the Ellsworths from their old street in Ames. "Oh, the old Ellsworth place," she said, adjusting a bag of apples. "That sold in February. Nice young couple bought it, I think. Lorraine was so happy to be done with the upkeep." February. I held a gallon of milk in my right hand and felt it going warm against my palm. February. They had sold the house in February. They arrived at my door in April with suitcases and a story about plumbing repairs and a roof patch on a house that already belonged to someone else. There were no renovations. There was no contractor. There was no timeline that kept getting pushed back. The entire premise of their stay, the single justification Lorraine had offered, the reason Garrett had nodded along to, the excuse that had kept me patient for 6 months, was a fabrication built on a property they had already sold 2 months before they knocked on my door. Every single day they had lived under my roof. They knew they had nowhere else to go, because they had made sure of it. I set the milk back on the shelf. I walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off and my hands on the steering wheel, and I said it out loud, to no one, to myself, to the sun pressing against my ribs at 31 weeks. "Your room, no one takes it twice." The next morning, a notice would go up on my front door, and every neighbor on the street would see it. The next morning, I taped it to my own front door at 7:15 so the whole street could read it on their way to work. September 20th. The 30-day notice had expired at midnight, and not a single box had been packed, not a single bag set by the door, not a single conversation about where they might go next. So I stood on my porch at 32 weeks pregnant with a roll of packing tape in one hand and a weatherproof plastic sleeve in the other, and I pressed a 3-day notice to vacate against the painted wood where the welcome wreath used to hang. Sabine had drafted it in 12-point type. Clean language, statutory citations, no ambiguity. I could have mailed it. I could have slid copies under bedroom doors at 2 in the morning when no one would see my hands shake. I could have handed it to Garrett and asked him to pass it along like every other request I had made for the past 7 months. I taped it to the front door instead. The plastic sleeve caught the early sun and threw a rectangle of light across the porch boards. A school bus was stopping 2 houses down. Mrs. Keller was walking her retriever on the opposite sidewalk. The Donovan kid was backing out of his driveway with the windows down and the stereo too loud. All of them could see me. All of them could read it. And for the first time since April, I did not care. You want to know why I posted it where the neighbors could see instead of sliding it under his door? Because for 6 months I had been whispering. Whispering is what people do when they are ashamed of their own house. I was done whispering in a home I paid for. I took a photo with my phone. Timestamp, address visible, notice centered in the frame, and texted it to Sabine. 3 days, 72 hours. After half a year of asking politely, of writing household plans nobody read, of offering deposits and moving help, and every bridge I could build with my own 2 hands, 72 hours was all I had left to give. The cold air tasted sharp in my lungs. I poured a cup of coffee, set it on the counter, and did not drink it. Some mornings you skip the ritual because the ritual belongs to a version of your life that no longer exists. Rhett came out 20 minutes later, bare feet on the cold porch boards, coffee mug in his right hand, phone in his left. He peeled the notice off the door with 2 fingers, held it at arm's length like a parking ticket, and read it on the top step. I watched him through the screen door. He read it twice. Then he laughed. Not a surprised laugh, not a nervous one. The laugh of a man who had spent 7 months testing a fence and genuinely believed, that the fence would never be electrified. He pressed it back against the door, crooked this time, one corner lifting in the breeze. Then he turned and spoke to me through the screen. 3 days? Court? You? He took a sip. Come on, Darcy. We both know you're not that person. I held his gaze through the mesh. You're right, I wasn't. But you fixed that. He stared for a beat longer than comfortable, then shook his head and smiled the way people smile when they have already decided you are bluffing. I'll save this, he said, tapping the notice with his knuckle. It'll be funny later. Have you ever had someone laugh at a legal document with your name on it while standing on a porch you paid for, drinking coffee you bought, wearing socks you washed? That laugh is not about confidence. It is about a person who has never once faced a consequence delivered by someone they considered beneath them. He went back inside. The screen door slapped shut behind him. I heard him drop into the recliner and turn on the television, volume up, morning news, as if nothing had changed, as if the notice was decoration. Lorraine came down 40 minutes later. She was dressed, hair pinned, slippers traded for her low-heeled shoes, the ones she wore to church and to funerals. She walked to the front door, stopped, and read the notice without touching it. Her lips moved once. I watched them form the word vacate, and then she turned around. She did not argue. She did not smooth a tablecloth or offer to make things normal. She did not say, it is not taking if it is family. She read every word, turned, climbed the stairs, and closed her bedroom door behind her. Not a slam, a click, then the lock. A second sound, deliberate and separate, like a period at the end of a sentence she had been composing all morning. Rhett was a man who slammed doors. You always knew where you stood. Lorraine was a woman who closed them quietly, and that was the one you watched. I stood in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs and listened to the silence above me. Rhett's television blared from the living room. Lorraine's door stayed shut. Garrett was already gone, left for work before dawn, keys lifted from the hook without a word, the way he had been leaving for weeks. 3 different reactions. One laughed, one locked her door, one disappeared before sunrise. Rhett saved the notice. He said it would be funny later. He was betting on the woman who had spent 6 months saying just a little longer, and I do not want to make it worse. He bet on the old Darcy. She no longer existed. The 3 days came and went. Nobody packed. Nobody left. So I drove to the Polk County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning and filed the eviction myself. The clerk did not look up when she stamped it. Her nameplate read, Marion Jessup, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, who processed landlord-tenant filings, the way a postal worker processes parcels, one after another, no opinion, no hesitation. She pressed the rubber stamp into blue ink and brought it down on the first page with a sound like a book dropped flat on a table. Ellsworth versus Ellsworth. She said my last name twice, and it meant 2 different things. The first was me. The second was everyone I had married into. Sabine had prepared the filing packet, the red folder I had built back in September, deed, mortgage statements, the email with Lorraine's 8-week terms, the heart emoji reply, time-stamped photographs of the notices, all of it copied, tabbed, and indexed. Marion flipped through the pages without expression, checked the statutory citations, and set the hearing date. October 14th, 3 weeks out. Confirmation by mail, she said, sliding the receipt across the counter. Courtroom 4B. I took the receipt and walked to my car. Filing an eviction against your own last name feels like signing a document that says this family was a house, and I am the one pulling out the foundation, because I am the one who poured it. I sat in the courthouse parking lot for 14 minutes, not crying, not calling anyone, just reading the case number printed on that thin slip of paper until it stopped looking like a betrayal and started looking like a blueprint. I drank vending machine coffee that tasted burnt and bitter, and I did not care because the coffee was not the point. The case number was the point. It had a docket. It had a date. It had a courtroom. The system did not care that we shared a last name. The system only cared about whose name was on the deed. 2 days later, the process server knocked on my front door at 4 p.m. I was in the kitchen. Rhett answered. I heard the knock, 3 firm raps, professional, spaced evenly, and then a voice I did not recognize asking for Rhett Ellsworth by full legal name. There was a pause. Paper changed hands. The front door closed. The process server told me later that Rhett had opened the door, smiling. He stopped smiling on the second line. Rhett did not save this one. He did not say it would be funny later. He walked past me in the kitchen, holding the summons in both hands like it was something fragile, went into the nursery, his room now, and shut the door. The television did not come on. The gaming console stayed dark. For the first time in 7 months, my house was quiet enough to hear the furnace click on. Something had shifted. The laugh that had carried him through every notice, every boundary, every conversation where I said no, and he heard maybe, that laugh was gone. He had been served, not by his sister-in-law asking politely, not by a household plan slid under pizza boxes. By the state of Iowa, case number stamped in blue ink, hearing date typed in bold. 3 weeks of silence followed. Lorraine stayed behind her locked door most days. Rhett stopped making predictions. Garrett came and went, like weather, present but untouchable, offering nothing, contesting nothing, a man standing precisely in the middle of a hallway while both walls closed in. The night before the hearing, Lorraine knocked on my bedroom door at 11. I was propped against 2 pillows at 35 weeks, ankles swollen, reading the same paragraph of a baby name book for the 3rd time. She opened the door without waiting for an answer. She was wearing her church shoes, the low-heeled pair she saved for Sundays and occasions that required a certain posture. She sat on the edge of my bed uninvited, and the mattress dipped toward her weight. She sat on my bed and sounded like a mother for 30 seconds, and I almost broke. Almost, because the voice was right, even if the woman behind it was not. "We can still fix this," she said. Her voice was low. No performance, no tablecloth to smooth, no kitchen to command. Just a 61-year-old woman sitting in the dark on her daughter-in-law's bed. "Drop the case. We will go back to normal. I will talk to Rhett about the nursery. We are family, Darcy." I let the word sit in the air. Family. The same word that had unlocked my front door in April, reorganized my kitchen in May, swallowed my office in June, and consumed my son's nursery in September. Family. The skeleton key they used to open every room in my house. "Normal was me paying for a seat at a table you all owned," I said. "I am done renting." She stood up. And I watched it happen. The way her shoulders pulled back, the way her chin lifted a 1/4 inch, the way 30 seconds of softness evaporated like breath on a cold window. The real voice came back mid-sentence, sweeping and constant and designed to keep everyone in orbit. "You will regret this," she said from the doorway. "A boy needs his grandparents." There she was. The real Lorraine lasted 30 seconds. The lighthouse was back, and tomorrow morning I would walk into a courtroom and turn off the light. The ceiling fan in courtroom 4B had a tick. Every 3rd rotation, a click, like a metronome counting down something nobody else could hear. I had not slept. Lorraine's threat about grandparents still hung in the air of my bedroom like smoke from a candle. Someone blew out but never moved. I showered, dressed, drove to Des Moines with the red folder on the passenger seat, and walked into the Polk County Courthouse at 8:45 on October 14th at 35 weeks, pregnant. Sabine Prescott was already seated at the plaintiff's table. She nodded once. I sat down beside her on a wooden bench, worn smooth by decades of people waiting for answers they were not sure they wanted. The bench pressed hard against my lower back. I set the red folder on the table and placed both hands flat on top of it. My mouth was dry. No water, no coffee, just the metallic taste of adrenaline held perfectly still. Rhett walked in 4 minutes before the hearing. He came alone. No attorney, no Lorraine, no Garrett, no briefcase, no folder, no single sheet of paper. He wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt, his version of court attire, and he sat on the respondent's side with his arms crossed and his jaw set like a man who believed that showing up was the same as being prepared. He walked into a courtroom without a lawyer because he genuinely believed that saying the word family would work on a judge the way it had worked on me for 7 months. Judge Fenton Hale entered without ceremony. He was a Polk County magistrate in his 60s, reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, who opened the Ellsworth file with the same neutral efficiency he brought to every forcible entry case on his Tuesday docket. He did not look at either of us with curiosity or sympathy. He looked at us the way a mechanic looks at an engine, find the problem, apply the code, move to the next one. Ellsworth versus Ellsworth, he read aloud. Forcible entry and detainer. Plaintiff present with counsel. Respondent. Are you representing yourself, sir? I don't need a lawyer for a family matter, Your Honor, Rhett said. Judge Hale looked at him over his glasses for exactly 1 second. Then he opened the file. What happened next took 90 seconds. I know, because the ceiling fan clicked 30 times, and each click was 3 seconds apart. I counted every one. Is your name on the deed to the property? Judge Hale asked. No, but is there a written lease agreement between you and the property owner? We're family. We don't need... Has any rent been paid to the property owner at any time during your occupancy? It's not like that. Were notices served in accordance with Iowa Code Chapter 562A? Sabine spoke before Rhett could interrupt. Yes, Your Honor. Time-stamped photographs and the process server's affidavit are included in the filing, pages 14 through 19. Judge Hale turned 2 pages, looked at the photographs, closed the folder. Rhett stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the courtroom like a scratch across glass. Your Honor, this is my brother's wife. This is family. You can't just... Judgment for the plaintiff, Judge Hale said, without raising his voice. Respondent and all occupants to vacate the premises within 10 calendar days. Court is adjourned. 1 tap of the gavel. Not dramatic, administrative. The clerk said, all rise, and the judge was gone before Rhett finished his sentence. 4 questions, 4 no's. 90 seconds. 7 months of occupation undone before the ceiling fan completed its next rotation. Rhett stood in the aisle for a moment, with the summons still in his hand, folded once down the middle. He did not look at me. He did not look at Sabine. He walked out of the courtroom and down the hallway and through the glass doors into the October cold without saying another word. Sabine put her hand on my shoulder, brief, firm, the touch of someone who had seen this exact scene play out 100 times and knew that the ruling was not the hard part. 10 days, she said. If they don't leave, we come back for the writ of removal. The sheriff handles it from there. I nodded. We walked out together. In. The parking lot. I watched Rhett cross the asphalt to his truck. He climbed into the cab and closed the door. The engine did not start. He sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at something beyond the windshield that I could not see. 7 minutes. I timed it from my own car while the heater blew warm air against my knees. 7 minutes of a man who had laughed at every notice, dismissed every boundary, treated every no as a maybe, sitting in a parking lot without a single thing to say. That was the first time I had ever seen Rhett Ellsworth not know what to do next. I pulled out of the lot and turned north toward Ankeny. My son kicked twice during the drive. Once at the merge onto I-35, once as I passed the exit for the hospital where he would be born in 4 weeks. The first kick for the house he had just been given, the second for the mother who took it back. 4 no's, 1 ruling, 90 seconds. 7 months erased by a man in a robe who did not care about blood, only about whose name was on the deed. 10 days. The countdown had started, and for the first time, it was counting down for them. I was waiting in the hallway like a man who had already rehearsed what he was going to say, and for once, I did not want to hear it. Garrett was leaning against the wall outside courtroom 4B when Sabine and I walked out, fluorescent light washing the color from his face. The water fountain behind him dripped at a rhythm that matched nothing. Sabine glanced at him, glanced at me, and said she would be at the car. She touched my elbow once and walked toward the elevator. He did not ask how the hearing went. He already knew. He had been in the building the entire time, not in the courtroom, not on the record, but somewhere in the hallway, listening or reading the result on my face. "I need to tell you something, Xia," he said. I leaned against the opposite wall and crossed my arms over my belly. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and recycled heat. A clerk walked between us, pushing a cart of files without looking at either of us. "The deed thing was my idea," Garrett said, "not Rhett's. I told him if we got my name on it, the house would become marital property and they'd have a permanent claim. That was the play from the beginning. The deed scheme was his idea, not Rhett's bluster, not Lorraine's maneuvering, Garrett's, the quiet one, the one who stood in the middle of every argument and let me believe he was stuck there, when the truth was he had drawn the map that put everyone else in motion. Before the wedding, I said. Yes. Before you said I do. The water fountain dripped 3 times before he answered. Yes. He confessed the way you explain a project that went wrong at work. Passive voice, unfortunate circumstances, decisions that seemed reasonable at the time. He did not cry. He laid out the timeline with the precision of a man relieved to finally set the blueprint down. The Rochester trip was chosen deliberately, 3 days away, enough time for the lock. The move-in was planned before I walked down the aisle. Every act of patience I had read as grace was strategy. Every silence I had mistaken for loyalty was calculation. I had married the architect and spent 7 months blaming the contractors. Sabine had warned me back in October, when the Ames house lie collapsed, that the conspiracy would go deeper than the in-laws. I had filed the warning in the same place I filed everything that hurt too much to examine. Later. Later was now. Later was a courthouse hallway with a dripping fountain and a husband who had just told me our marriage began as an acquisition strategy with a honeymoon attached. I pushed off the wall. I'm driving home, separately. Have you ever driven home from the worst conversation of your life at exactly the speed limit? Because if you drove any faster, you would be admitting it mattered more than you could stand. 30 minutes on Highway 69. That is how long it takes to drive from Des Moines to Ankeny. That is how long it takes to decide your marriage is over. I did not scream. I did not pull over. I drove with both hands on the wheel, while 7 months of marriage rearranged themselves into what they had actually been, a transaction with vows. Every kind word had a purpose. Every compromise had a deadline. The man who told me he was caught in the middle had built the middle specifically so I would feel sorry for him standing in it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the grief had finished its circuit. It had moved through my chest and down my arms and out through my fingertips on the steering wheel. And it was done. Not gone. Done. There is a difference. Garrett's truck was already there. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his hands folded, waiting again. Always waiting. Always rehearsed. "I want you to leave," I said. I set my keys on the counter. "Not a divorce, a separation. But you cannot stay here, not after what you told me in that hallway." "Where am I supposed to go?" "Wherever your family is. You chose them 7 months ago. Go be with them." He did not argue. That was the part that confirmed everything. A man who had been wrongly accused would have fought. A man who knew exactly what he had done packed a duffel bag in 11 minutes. I stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to the zipper, the dresser drawers, the closet hangers sliding on the rod. 11 minutes. That is how long it takes to leave a marriage you were never fully in. He walked to the front door with the bag over one shoulder. He stopped. He did not turn around. The door closed. I reached for the deadbolt. The same lock, the same brass knob, the same door. I turned it. The click was small and ordinary and mine. I did not kick him out. I stopped holding his place, the way you stop saving a seat for someone who was never planning to sit down. The moving truck arrived on day 8, 2 days early, which meant Lorraine wanted me to know she was leaving on her terms, not mine. 6 days had passed since I turned the deadbolt behind Garrett. 6 days of a house that was quieter, but not yet quiet, because Lorraine and Noelle were still packing, and Rhett was still behind the nursery door, and every room still smelled like people who had not been invited and had not left. But on the morning of day 8, a rented box truck backed into my driveway at 7, with its reverse lights cutting through the October dark, and Lorraine Ellsworth stood on my porch in her church coat, directing the loading like a woman overseeing a retreat she had chosen. She did not look at me once. Noel carried the boxes, the quilt rack, the sewing machine that had replaced my office, the percolator that had displaced my coffee maker. 31 labeled boxes had arrived in April, and 26 went back into the truck in October. 5 boxes fewer. I did not ask what had been absorbed into my house during those 7 months. I would find traces for weeks. A mug in the wrong cabinet, a throw pillow behind the couch, a Bible bookmark tucked into a kitchen drawer like a seed planted for a harvest no one would ever collect. Lorraine left, the way a tide goes out. Not because you asked, but because the moon said so, and the sand is supposed to be grateful for the silence. When the truck was loaded, she walked to the passenger door. She stopped with her hand on the handle and spoke without turning around. "I hope this house keeps you warm, Darcy. Houses are very good at that, keeping people warm and alone." She climbed in and pulled the door shut. Not a slam, a close, precise, controlled, measured. The sound itself was the message. No hug, no backward glance, no softening of the jaw or last-minute fracture in the performance. She was Lorraine Ellsworth from the first word to the last, and the last word was alone. I wanted to feel nothing. I felt everything. The truck pulled away. I watched it turn left at the end of the block and disappear behind the Donovan's fence line. My tea was going cold on the porch railing. Chamomile, the kind I had started drinking when coffee made the baby kick too hard. I wrapped both hands around the mug and waited for the relief to arrive. It did not come. What came instead was the sound of a toolbox. Noel's sedan was still in the driveway. He had not left with the truck. I found him at the back gate. the one that had been squeaking since April, the one I had mentioned twice in the household plan that nobody read, the one that every person in that family had walked through 100 times without ever picking up a can of oil. I was on his knees in the frozen grass with a can of WD-40 and a socket wrench, tightening the latch and oiling the hinges. His breath was visible in the cold. His hands were steady. A 64-year-old retired lineman on his knees, oiling a gate hinge in someone else's backyard. And it was the first honest thing anyone in his family had done in my house since the day they arrived. "Noel, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said without looking up. "This one I do." He tested the gate 3 times. Open, close, open, close, open, close, silent every time. The squeak that had greeted me every morning for 7 months was gone. It was the smallest repair and the only one anyone in that family had ever made. He set the toolbox down and stood. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone when he has been carrying something for a long time and has decided to put it on the ground between them. "My sister Eleanor had a place in Cedar Falls," he said. "Lorraine did the same thing, moved in to help, stayed to run it, and Eleanor left her own house rather than fight. That was 1994. I watched it happen then, and I watched it happen now, and both times I said nothing. The air was cold enough to taste, metal and frost and diesel lingering from the truck. I held my mug and let him talk. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm telling you I saw it, and I want you to know that someone in this family knew it was wrong. I knew. He watched it happen to his own sister 30 years ago, and he chose silence both times. But the second time, at least, he came back with a toolbox and the truth. He did not hug me. He reached into his jacket and set a sealed envelope on the porch railing, thick, bent at the edges, cash by the weight of it. For utilities, I assumed, or for the months of groceries, or for whatever number he had calculated during sleepless nights when he lay beside a woman he loved and a conscience he did not. He nodded once and walked to his car. The engine started. The gravel crunched. He turned left at the end of the block, the same direction the truck had gone, and the driveway was empty. The house was quiet for the first time in 7 months. The gate did not squeak. The guest room was bare. The envelope sat on the railing in the cold. But Rhett's truck was still parked on the street. He had not left with his parents. He had not left at all. On day 10, the county sent 2 men with a red tag and a locksmith. Rhett was still inside eating cereal. His truck had not moved. The parents who orchestrated everything had driven away on day 8 without him. And for 2 more days, he stayed, sleeping in the nursery, using my shower, eating food from my refrigerator as if the court order pinned to the kitchen corkboard was a suggestion he had declined. I called Sabine on the morning of day 10, and she said 5 words. The writ is already filed. They arrived at 8. Deputy Ames Caldwell, a Polk County Bailiff's deputy in his 40s, with a clipboard and a lanyard, stepped onto my porch with the procedural calm of a man who did this every Tuesday. Behind him stood a locksmith in a gray jacket and 2 men in reflective vests, the set-out crew. Sabine was on speakerphone in my pocket. The deputy knocked 3 times. Firm, spaced, official. Polk County Sheriff's Office. Writ of removal. Case number 2025, FEDI 4471. You have 30 minutes to collect personal belongings before the set-out crew enters. He had 10 days to find an apartment, call a friend, rent a room, and he spent every single one of them telling people I would not go through with it, because that was what he needed to believe more than he needed a plan. Sabine's voice came through my pocket. Don't engage. Let the deputy handle it. You're the plaintiff. You stand on the porch and you wait. I waited. 30 minutes passed. Rhett did not come out. Deputy Caldwell nodded to the set-out crew, and they went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table, Lorraine's old seat, the one at the head, and placed my hands flat on the surface, not gripping, resting, the way you rest your hands when the thing you have been pushing against for 7 months finally gives way and there is nothing left to push. They carried his life out of my house one armload at a time. Clothes in black garbage bags knotted at the top. The television he had mounted on the nursery wall. I could see the bracket holes when they opened the door. 4 dark circles in the paint where my son's mobile was supposed to hang. Shoes in a laundry basket. A weight bench disassembled into 3 pieces. The mini fridge that had hummed through the wall every night since September. The gaming console. A box of protein powder. A pillow without a case. A weight bench. A mini fridge. And a TV mounted over the holes where my son's crib was supposed to hang. That was what 7 months of occupation looked like on a curb in October. Rhett followed the last box out, barefoot on the cold concrete. He stopped in the kitchen doorway on his way through and looked at me, sitting in Lorraine's chair. "You're going to regret this," he said. "You said that about the notice," I said. "You said that about the filing. You said that about the hearing. When does one of your predictions come true, Rhett?" He had no answer. For the first time in 7 months, Rhett Ellsworth had absolutely nothing to say. He walked out barefoot, and the deputy closed the door behind him. I did not stand at the window. I did not go to the lawn. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the set-out crew's boots on the porch steps, the garbage bags hitting the curb, the deputy's radio crackling something routine and indifferent. My son pressed against my ribs at 36 weeks, and I placed one hand on the spot and kept the other flat on the table. The crew finished. Deputy Caldwell came to the kitchen door, had me sign the completion form, and left. The locksmith changed the front deadbolt in 4 minutes and handed me 2 new keys. I thanked him. He nodded and followed the deputy to the county vehicle. Rhett sat on the curb. He sat there for hours, his belongings spread around him on the frozen grass, garbage bags, the disassembled weight bench, the mini fridge lying on its side. He did not call Lorraine. He did not call Noel. He did not call Garrett. Or maybe he did, and none of them answered. Either way, nobody came. Where was his mother? The woman who had orchestrated all of this. Where was his father, who had fixed my gate but could not fix his son? Where was Garrett? Nowhere. Every single one of them, nowhere. At 4 in the afternoon, a pickup truck pulled to the curb. A man I had never seen, older, broad-shouldered, silent, got out and began loading Rhett's things into the bed without a word. His girlfriend's father, a stranger who owed Rhett nothing, was the only person who showed up for him on the worst day of his life. Rhett climbed into the passenger seat. He did not look at the house. The door closed. The tailgate slammed. The engine turned over, and the truck pulled away, turning left at the stop sign, and the street went still. No truck in my driveway. No television behind the nursery door. No boots by the front mat. No cereal bowls in my sink. No deadbolt I did not control. For the first time since April, my house had no one in it but me. 36 weeks pregnant, standing on a porch in October, holding 2 new keys in my palm, listening to nothing at all. The locksmith arrived at 9 on Saturday morning and asked how many doors. I said all of them. The silence had lasted 12 hours. 12 hours of a house with no footsteps but mine, no television behind the nursery wall, no voices in conversations I was not part of. I had slept 7 hours straight for the first time since April and woken to a house that felt like something returned from a long loan, familiar but slightly changed, the way a book looks different after someone else has held it open too long and bent the spine. Dale Furman pulled his van into the driveway at 9 sharp. He was a locksmith from Ankeny, mid-50s, quiet hands, the kind of man who did not ask why a pregnant woman wanted every lock in her house changed on a Saturday morning. He brought a drill, a bag of lock cores, and an invoice pad. That was all he needed. He started with the front door. I watched him remove the old deadbolt, the one the previous owners had installed, the one I had locked behind Garrett 6 days ago, and replace it with a brushed nickel core. New pins, new tumblers, new key. He moved to the back door, then the side garage entry, then the nursery. 45 seconds. That is how long it took him to remove the deadbolt Rhett had installed on my son's room. He drilled out the screws, pulled the hardware from the door, and set the old brass lock on the hallway floor like a tooth extracted from a jaw that had been clenched too long. I picked it up and put it in the junk drawer in the kitchen. Not a memento. Evidence. The kind of thing you keep in case someone someday tries to tell you it did not happen. 4 doors, 4 new cores, Dale said, holding up a single key. You want the same key for all of them? 1 key, I said. 1 set. Nobody else gets a copy. He finished in 90 minutes. I signed the invoice. He left, and I stood in the front doorway, turning the new key in the new lock, sharp-edged and unworn, no scratches, no history, no one else's fingerprints. It turned smooth and clicked clean, and it was mine. Then I walked the house. The guest room first. Furniture indentations pressed into the carpet. 4 deep rectangles where the bed frame had stood. 2 circles from the nightstand legs. A curtain rod ripped from the wall bracket and never repaired. The closet empty, but not clean. A wire hanger on the rod and a single sock behind the door that no one had bothered to retrieve. The living room, tape ghosts on the hardwood. That is what I called them, the adhesive outlines left on the floor in the shape of a weight bench that was never supposed to be there. Like chalk marks at a crime scene, nobody reported. A scuff on the baseboard near the outlet where the mini fridge had hummed for months. The nursery. I stood in the doorway and looked at what they had left behind. Nail holes in the wall where a television had hung over the spot where my son's crib was supposed to stand. Scuff marks on the baseboards from furniture dragged in and out. The paint I had chosen in April, the sage green I had picked, still intact beneath the damage, still the color I had chosen while sitting cross-legged on this floor with a fan of swatches and a future I thought was simple. I did not cry. I made a list. Spackle, paint, curtain rod, crib reassembly. I am a CRNA. I chart damage for a living. This was no different. 4 walls, a list of injuries, a treatment plan. I went to the basement. The crib. Hardware was still in its box, shoved behind the water heater, where I had stored it in September when Rhett's duffel bag appeared in the nursery. I carried it upstairs, 1 piece at a time. Side rails, mattress platform, bolts in a Ziploc bag, because the full box was too heavy for 37 weeks. 4 trips up the basement stairs, each one slower than the last, each one a small act of retrieval that no one was there to help with and no one needed to be. I positioned the first rail against the wall beneath the window I had chosen for morning light, the window I had imagined standing beside at 3 a.m, with a newborn against my shoulder and the street lamp throwing a yellow square across the floor. I did not finish assembling the crib that night. I leaned the rails against the wall and stood in the center of the room with my hand on my belly and listened. The refrigerator, humming through the floor. I could hear my refrigerator. That sounds like nothing. But for 7 months, it had been buried under footsteps and television noise and conversations I was not invited to in rooms I paid for. Now it was the only sound in the house, and it was mine, my refrigerator, my floor, my house, doing what a house is supposed to do, holding one person safe inside it and asking nothing in return. I put my hand on the wall where the nail holes were. I would fill them tomorrow. Tonight, I stood in my son's room and listened to silence. 10 days. I was 10 days away. The nursery was not finished, but the locks were changed, and the key was mine, and the house was breathing again. I said his name out loud, just once, just to hear it fill the room where he would sleep. I was born on a Tuesday, 7 pounds, 9 ounces, full term, no complications, a cry that filled the delivery room before the doctor finished counting fingers. 10 days had passed since I stood in the nursery and said his name into the empty room. 10 days of spackle and paint and crib assembly and a quiet house that held its breath the way I held mine. And now he was here, on my chest, eyes shut, one fist curled against my collarbone, and the 9 months collapsed into a single weight I could carry with both arms. I named him alone. No committee, no family vote, no compromise. One name chosen in the 3rd trimester while lying in a bed that finally had only one person in it, written on the birth certificate in my handwriting with no one leaning over my shoulder to suggest alternatives. The first decision about my son that belonged entirely to me. Bryn Gallagher was there. She had driven from Des Moines at 4 a.m. when I called, still in scrubs, from her overnight shift in the pediatric ICU, and she sat in the chair beside the bed holding a cup of ice chips and saying nothing, because she knew that sometimes the best thing a friend can do is be present without performing. "He's perfect, Darce," she said, when the nurse laid him on my chest. She was the one person who had been there from the beginning, before the in-laws, before the texts, before the courthouse. She earned that seat. You have been listening to this story for a long time now, and I need you to know that the moment I held him, every single thing I did made sense. Not because it was easy, because he was the reason I did not stop. Garrett called from a number I did not recognize. I let it ring. He could meet his son tomorrow, on my schedule, in my house, on my terms. 2 days later, I carried my boy through the front door and up the stairs to the nursery. The nail holes were filled. The walls were repainted. The same sage green I had chosen back in the spring. Same brand, same finish, same wall. But this coat was mine in a way the first one never was, because this time I knew what it cost to keep it. The crib stood beneath the window that catches the morning light. The mobile I had bought before the wedding hung where it was always supposed to, elephants and giraffes in a slow circle, turning above the mattress with the patient, mechanical click of something that had waited 7 months in a basement box for this exact moment. The mobile had waited in the dark longer than any of us. Elephants and giraffes turning in a box no one opened, patient as a promise nobody else was keeping. I never told Noel what the envelope covered, but I kept his oil can by the back gate anyway. I laid him down. His eyes opened for a moment, unfocused, gray-blue, seeing nothing and everything, and then they closed again. His hand curled around my index finger and held on the way. Babies hold on, without knowing why, just because the grip is there and the finger is warm. The refrigerator hummed through the floor, the same hum I had heard the night I reclaimed this room, the sound of a house with one person in it, 2 now, doing what a house is supposed to do. I stood at the crib rail and watched him breathe. 1 week later, the doorbell rang. I had never heard my doorbell from inside before. Everyone who had lived in this house had a key. Lorraine had a key. Noel had a key. Rhett had installed his own lock. The doorbell was for delivery drivers and neighbors. Now it was for the man whose name was on the marriage certificate, but not the deed. Garrett stood on the porch. He looked thinner. He did not try the handle. He waited. I let him in, not because I had to, because I chose to. That is the only kind of door worth opening. He held his son for the first time in the living room, not the nursery. The nursery was earned space, and he had not earned it yet. He sat on the couch, and I placed the baby in his arms and watched his face do what faces do when they hold something that is half theirs and entirely someone else's responsibility. He looks like you, Garrett said. He lives like me too, I said, in a house with one key. We did not pretend. We did not talk about reconciliation or timelines or whether love was still the right word for what remained between us. Counseling or dissolution, those were the two roads, and neither involved him moving back in. He understood, or he was learning to. He left after an hour. I walked him to the door. He stepped onto the porch and turned around once, not to say something, just to look at the house. My house. The one I bought alone, defended alone, and won back alone. I closed the door. I turned the lock. The new hardware, the brushed nickel, the single key that hung on the hook by the light switch where I could see it from the nursery doorway. Then I went upstairs and lifted my son from the crib and sat in the chair by the window. The morning light came through the glass the way I had imagined it would back in March, before any of this started, warm, slanted, landing on the floor in a rectangle that moved with the hour. One lock, one key, mine. I decide who comes in, and I decide when they leave. I spent 7 months believing that keeping the peace was the same as keeping my home. I let the word family unlock every door I owned because I thought love meant never changing the locks. Do not make my mistake. Do not confuse someone's comfort with your safety. The moment you start paying rent on a life you already own, you have waited too long. This was never a revenge story, not really. People will hear it and call it a revenge story because a woman stood up and the system worked and the people who took from her had to leave. But revenge means wanting someone to hurt. I did not want anyone to hurt. I wanted my son to have his room. I wanted to sleep in a house where every key on the hook was mine. I believe God put me through this so I could stand here and tell you, your home is not just walls and a mortgage. It is the first promise you make to the people who have not arrived yet. Protect that promise the way you would protect them. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about your own doors and your own keys and the people you have let walk through them, leave me a comment. Tell me what you would have done differently, or tell me you would have done the same thing. Share this with someone who needs to hear that protecting yourself is not the same as being cruel. And if you are not yet subscribed, I would love to have you here for the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story were fictionalized to bring the lesson to life, but the heart of it, the message about boundaries, about ownership, about knowing when family is a gift and when it is a key someone copied without asking, that part is as real as it gets.